The presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, BiH, acts as the collective tripartite head of state. I'm elected there from the Republic of Srpska, one of the two entities that make up Bosnia and Herzegovina. As a reminder, the other two members of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina are elected from the other entity known as the Federation of BiH. This clearly shows that Bosnia and Herzegovina does not represent a single election unit when it comes to the election of the common institutions at the BiH level. This also indicates that the BiH constitution, which is Annex 4 of the Dayton Accords, was carefully designed so as to establish a system of two highly autonomous entities and three constituent peoples, with important power-sharing mechanisms to give each of the constituent peoples protection that they will not come under the dominance of the other ethnic groups, and that they will all participate in governing the country on equal terms. And it is exactly this principle of equality that has been the major keeper of peace and stability in our country, not the repression, tutoring, or international interventions, as often wrongly and unwisely claimed by those who want to justify such international interventionism and their colonial behavior. Here I would like to emphasize some of the critical issues that burden Bosnia and Herzegovina and hinder its progress. But let me first say a few words about the Republic of Srpska and the positions of its institutions that are often wrongly presented in a quite tendentious manner by many inside and outside Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Republic of Srpska does not breach the Dayton Accords or international law. Quite the contrary, it advocates a strict adherence to the BiH constitution as part of the treaty, which leaves most of the competencies in the hands of the two entities and provides each of the three constituent peoples with safeguard mechanisms to protect their rights. As well, respect for international law means that high representatives must be appointed under the procedures set in Annex 10 of the Dayton Accords, and that they must act within their prescribed mandate. The Republic of Srpska does not breach the rule of law. On the contrary, it advocates that our constitution and the procedures it prescribes are respected, that our institutions and constitutional rules are not misused or bypassed, as, for instance, is the case with the current resolution on the Remembrance Day for Srebrenica, launched for adoption in the United Nations General Assembly without any prior consultations and approval by the relevant and competent BiH institutions. The Republic of Srpska does not undermine democracy. Quite the contrary, it is adamant that only our democratically elected institutions are entitled to pass laws, and that these cannot and must not be imposed by non-elected foreign individuals. The Republic of Srpska has been committed to peace and stability, and it wishes to see Bosnia and Herzegovina as a truly democratic and sovereign state, able to promote internal dialogue in seeking balanced and constitution-based solutions that would fit all in BiH. Unfortunately, the challenges we have been facing in recent years threaten to undermine not only the BiH constitution, but also the security and stability of the country and even the entire Western Balkan region. Those who persistently keep Bosnia and Herzegovina in a quasi-protectorate status where the rule of law and democratic governance are circumvented and autocratic and colonialistic foreign interventions prevent reconciliation between our peoples contribute directly to these threats. There are currently several major challenges to peace and stability within BiH. Most are being manipulated, initiated by foreign and domestic political actors who seek to rewrite the Dayton Agreement, the BiH Constitution, BiH laws, and international law. These threats to peace and stability can be divided into the following categories: interference in internal politics or political and democratic processes, use of the threat of force or violence, disrespect for the rule of law and violations of international law, interference in elections and disenfranchisement of voters. And let me briefly elaborate on these challenges and threats. At the center of every dispute within Bosnia and Herzegovina is a fundamental issue of contention over the nature of the joint state. Under Dayton, as well as historically, BiH could only function through consensual decision-making in which each people would be protected from being outvoted by the representatives of the other two peoples. Unfortunately, while the Serb and Croat peoples and their elected representatives have consistently fought for the observance of the Dayton Accords as they were written and signed, the Bosniaks and their elected representatives have favored a much more unitary and centralized state. Often the Bosniak political goal of centralization of BiH would be supported and furthered by foreign actors within BiH. Through years of illegal decrees and coercion, the High Representative significantly altered the constitutional structure of BiH established under the Dayton Accords. In effect, the High Rep sections have interfered in the internal democratic processes and debates by elected and legitimate representatives of the constituent peoples and entities of BiH. The High Rep, mostly siding with Bosniak aspirations for a centralized state, has violated essential provisions of the Dayton Accords, which provided for protection and equality of the constituent peoples, thus destabilizing peace and security within BiH. Every sovereign state and all democratically elected officials are protected from foreign interference in internal affairs by the United Nations Charter and numerous international treaties and laws. Unfortunately, certain foreign diplomats within BiH and Mr. Christian Schmidt, who presents himself as some kind of cross between a colonial governor and a classic despot, have continually and with increasingly destructive tendency interfered in the internal democratic and decision-making processes within BiH. This interference has undermined political consensus at the joint BiH level, which has guided and fueled BiH progress on the path to EU membership. Consensus over BiH membership in the EU is the only issue of importance which allows for difficult compromises and agreement among all of our BiH political forces and elected leaders. As such, it is essential for the maintenance of peace and stability within our joint state. Other foreign actors, such as the Peace Implementation Council, which is not part of the international law, as it was not envisaged by the Dayton Accords, and individual diplomats accredited within BiH have similarly interfered in internal affairs and have, through this interference, assisted in the OHR's illegal actions. Even the proposed resolution in the United Nations General Assembly on Srebrenica Remembrance Day is a blatant example of how foreign interference and disrespect for the BiH constitution undermines peace and stability. The draft resolution authored by certain countries and the BiH ambassador to the UN, Zlatko Lagumdzija, reflects the utter disregard for the BiH constitution and BiH presidency, which is solely authorized to formulate BiH foreign policy. There was no discussion or authorization of the presidency of this draft resolution. Furthermore, there is no consensus among our peoples or at any level of governance about the text of the resolution, which has been intentionally withheld and hidden from the public. Most of your governments know very well that this activity has been conducted in contravention with the Dayton Accords, but you simply decided to ignore that fact. Some UN members believe that resolution to be benign and an act of human compassion. However, it is clear that the intent behind it is all but benign. Professor Francis Boyle, a legal advisor to Bosniak political leaders, last Friday, April 26th, in an interview on a Sarajevo TV network, stated that following the passing of the resolution in the United Nations General Assembly, all so-called pro-Bosnian forces must unite to use it to end the Republic of Srpska. This dangerous statement, unfortunately, reflects a prevalent intention held by many Bosniak political leaders and clearly shows the proposed resolution to be destabilizing for peace and stability within BiH. It is little wonder why this type of foreign interference undermines negotiations and compromise within BiH, because it always favors one side, the Bosniak. And while the Republic of Srpska officials speak about necessity to maintain peace and stability and to resolve all pending political issues in democratic institutions, some threats and militaristic statements by Western ambassadors in Sarajevo seek to instill fear in Serbs, while at the same time giving credence to the hopes of some radical forces among the Bosniak political leadership that NATO would solve the problematic Republic of Srpska by eliminating it. At the same time, Bosniak officials such as BiH Minister of Defense, Zukan Heles, and the Federation of BiH Minister of Security, Ramo Isak, openly threaten violence and war. Among many inflammatory statements by Minister Heles, two of the most threatening have been his claim that he was creating a reserve military force in BiH and his call for weapons training to be introduced to BiH schools. Minister Isak, on the other hand, has stated that he would lead, quote, lead 10 corps of fighters in eliminating the Republic of Srpska, unquote. It should be noted that these types of threats and calls for violence are rarely condemned by Mr. Schmidt or by foreign ambassadors in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It should also be noted that the present danger of radical Islamic terrorist cells threatens not only peace in BiH, the Western Balkans, but all of Europe. Only 2 weeks ago, law enforcement agents in the town of Zenica arrested one individual suspected of being part of a radical Islamist group in the Federation entity. Local media in BiH also recently reported that Minister Heles, which is he is Minister of Defense, authorized the use of shooting ranges belonging to the armed forces of BiH in Mostar by foreigners and local individuals associated with the radical Wahhabi movement. This is particularly dangerous and irresponsible as for many years BiH has been marked by foreign media and international security reports as the most dangerous source of jihadist terrorism in Europe. Concern over the terrorist threats emanating from BiH has been noted by many Western governments and other sources. For example, the US State Department wrote last year, quote, terrorist groups continue plotting possible attacks in BiH, unquote. In 2021, French President Emmanuel Macron, referring to the presence of jihadists in BiH, called the country, quote, a ticking time bomb, unquote. According to data published by the Wilson Center in Washington, among European countries, BiH had the highest per capita number of citizens who left to wage jihad in Syria and Iraq. As we all know, the rule of law is one of the essential requirements for peace and for democratic governance. Unfortunately, it is consistently being violated and ignored within BiH, especially by Mr. Schmidt and his enablers and accomplices in certain foreign embassies. The rule of law is also at the heart of the EU integration process, and the EU and EU member state representatives are constantly stressing the importance of adhering to the rule of law, but they meekly criticize its consistent violation by Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schmidt and his supporters claim that he has executive, judicial, and legislative powers, and that he is not accountable to any institution or government or court of law in BiH. In other words, they hold that he has absolute power and no accountability. It is unclear and very unclear how this can fit any normal concept of the rule of law. In an even greater affront to the rule of law, Mr. Schmidt amended the criminal code of BiH to use it as a weapon to punish anyone who disobeys his dictates. Currently, the democratically elected president of the Republic of Srpska, as well as a public official, are being prosecuted for fulfilling their constitutional and legal responsibilities, but in doing so, disobeying Mr. Schmidt's illegal orders. The rule of law is also under attack by the threatened use of international sanctions by the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom. The threat and the use of sanctions are used to intimidate elected and other government officials, their families, private businesses, and even media. Any leader who refuses to comply with Mr. Schmidt or who refuses to accept illegal changes to the Dayton Accords are openly and persistently targeted with sanctions. These sanctions are administered without due process, that is, without any formal charges or even a minute before a judge or in front of a court of law. Banks are forced to close accounts and refuse services to these individuals who have not been formally charged with any crime. This is behavior more common in the realms of organized crime and in no way resembles behavior of democratic states supportive of the international legal order or the rule of law. This blatant lawless behavior and utter defiance of the rule of law by Mr. Schmidt, his accomplices in BiH and his enablers from various governments undermines the entire constitutional order in BiH, weakens institutions of government and ignores the will of the citizens of our country. No doubt this behavior is a threat to peace and stability in BiH. In addition to the violations of the Dayton Accords, international law, the constitution of BiH, and the rule of law already described, there are continued efforts to disenfranchise voters in BiH. The latest decree by Mr. Schmidt has forced changes to election law in BiH in a clear attempt to interfere with and fix election results in upcoming local elections. Although billed as technical changes to the election law to ensure greater election integrity, this decision in fact is political and calls into question the integrity of the entire election process, handing effective control and influence to an unelected foreigner. Once again, Mr. Schmidt violates the Dayton Accords, transfers authority from the entity government to a centralized state body, the Central Election Commission, which both lacks legitimacy and legality. Furthermore, he violates labor laws, and this is very important. So he violates labor laws by extending the term of office of the members of the Central Election Commission beyond legal and mandatory retirement limits. The Central Election Commission is empowered to circumvent courts by being mandated by Mr. Schmidt to directly punish any perceived violations of his election law. Through the same dictate, he also deprives some BiH citizens of their constitutional and legal right to run for elected office without due process or any legal remedy. When the Republic of Srpska National Assembly and elected representatives took legal measures to protect the Dayton Accords integrity of local elections within the Republic of Srpska, elected officials were openly threatened with forced removal and various punishments by Mr. Schmidt and his accomplices. Fundamentally, by depriving elected officials and government institutions of their constitutional authority and responsibility, the voters of BiH are disenfranchised. Every time Christian Schmidt imposes one of his edicts mocking BiH's democratic constitutional order and the terms of the Dayton Accords, it is destabilizing to BiH. Mr. Schmidt's repressive decrees, reckless edicts, threats, and other interference have provoked crisis after crisis in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Recent actions and rhetoric by Republika Srpska officials that certain foreign states have condemned were all provoked predictably by Mr. Schmidt's egregiously illegal actions. The fact is, when outsiders like Mr. Schmidt or those who support him engage in flagrantly abusive and illegal actions and seek to weaken, sanction, or even imprison our democratically elected leaders, it has perfectly predictable consequences. It drives the Republic of Srpska citizens and its elected officials to confront such wrongdoings. It is clear that the continual violations of the Dayton Accords by Mr. Schmidt, again, and his international and domestic accomplices represent threats to peace and directly undermine stability within Bosnia and Herzegovina. These violations must be condemned in every way, and they must be brought to an end as soon as possible. I thank you for your attention and ask that you all, with renewed vigor, continue to support peace and stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina.